Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am so excited today because I have Keith Matejka on the line. Say hello,
Hey,
Keith.
hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you, buddy.
Absolutely. This will be your fifth appearance on the channel, the fourth talking about Thunderworks games, and we have Mall Peak standalone sequel to Skull Hollow coming out on Kickstarter
Right.
March 8th. And was thinking about you. We're talking all the time anyway, and I thought it'd be great to talk about Thunderworks games because you continue to be a rock star. Thunderworks game is killing it. And you and I talk regularly, but you go through lots of really interesting cycles as you've become a bigger and bigger publisher, game maker, master of all things. And um, so we talked early on when you were still working and I was working, and early days Thunderworks Games role player. That was like our first video.
Right.
Fast forward a year, you were making the leap into um, into
Like full-time
being full
publishing.
time.
Yep.
Great. I'll link every one of these episodes so that people can see the entire series, and then and you can see how we've changed over the years. Um, and then we fast forward to May 2020. You've been doing it at that point for about a year and a half, almost 2 years from our last chat. Role Player Adventures was coming to Kickstarter, something around that time.
Yep.
Cartographers was probably taking
Doing
kicking
well.
butt and taking names, and and we were like walking into the pandemic. I mean, we were there, right? 2020, yes,
Right. Yeah,
right,
we were definitely kind of at
yeah,
the first kind of quarter of the pandemic for sure.
dealing with that, and we also were, and shipping was starting to like the shipping thing was beginning probably,
Right.
um, and so now it is 2022.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and your team's expanding, and well, but I don't want to tell. Your turn. So Keith, coming off of that period, you were running into the role player adventures rather.
Right.
You know, what are some of the things that have happened in this last year, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So 2020, obviously, I ran. Um, I kind of I was treating 2020 as what I was calling like an inhale year. So I was like, I was developing new products, which is, I wasn't going to many conventions around that time. I'm developing new products, and I had three Kickstarters outstanding, so Role Player Adventures, we did a Kickstarter for. We did a Kickstarter for the sequel to Cartographers, which is Cartographers Heroes, and we also did a Kickstarter for the expansion for Lockup, which is called Lockup Breakout. So, and then, I kind of hit the cap. So there's this idea of like, you can't have too many outstanding Kickstarters at a time because it makes, customers potentially nervous. There's this whole fear of people funding future Kickstarters with previous Kickstarters. So I had kind of hit my cap, but I wanted to put out more games. So then I was looking at putting out some of these titles straight to retail as not necessarily an experiment, but it's not something that I've done a lot of. So
But that
um,
straight to retail thing was a big bet, and it wasn't the biggest game. It was not taking role player adventure straight to retail, but it was a big bet that worked out for you.
right. So straight to retail, we released Cape May near the end of last year, which went straight to retail, and then I have a new title coming out in a few months called Ten Penny Parks, which is straight to retail as well. Those are both outside of the role player universe, which is potentially less of a sure bet in terms of product, but um, yeah. So I had these products that I wanted to do. I had this list of games, and they were all kind of chugging along. And 2019 and 2020, I was like, kind of finishing these things and finally getting them to market. So like the number of titles that I've put out, is I think when Role Player Adventures and Cartographers Heroes came out and were delivered in November-ish of 2021, and that also included Cape May at the same time. Like I had, I think I
So
had
much.
13 containers coming over. Prices were going through the roof. They're still
I
not
mean, 13
cheap by any
containers,
stretch.
just, I mean, not to like dive in directly, but 13 containers is like 200, $300,000 nowadays.
Right.
I mean, we're talking, that's the kind of number we're talking when you say 13 containers.
Right, and some of those were, as like, I think one of them was $55,000, and many of them were in the high, in the 20s and 30s. But those, when you start working on these projects and you're thinking, oh, it's like a $6,000 per container kind of fee. Now we have this much larger number. There's been a lot of people talking about this, but it was this moment where all these independent publishers are kind of freaking out. Everybody's kind of freaking out because it's like you didn't budget for these additional massive expenses, and people were scrambling of like, well, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to bear the weight of these additional expenses I wasn't planning for? And there's like a whole discussion about different things people did in terms of like just delaying projects, asking backers for more money, and then Thunderworks. I had this perspective of like, if I was a backer, I wouldn't want the person coming back and asking for some more money. And Thunderworks is in a position in which, I can weather the storm. So I basically just ate it, So like definitely 2021 was a rough year for anybody importing things for China or whatever. So there's that it made it kind of rough, but we continue to do well. We had 3 really successful Kickstarters. The third one is about to deliver to backers. Thunderworks has been just me for a very long time, and then in 2020, I hired my wife because her business was
awesome
shutting.
and making you awesome, man. She's doing a great job.
Yeah, my wife is amazing, but so she came on I guess 2 years ago now, in a part-time kind of sense, because obviously she's a mother as well as a Thunderworks employee. I'm a father in Thunderworks as well, but she takes some more of that role than I do. And then this year, in January, we brought Kirk Dennison over, and we did a big Q&A about that on the Thunderworks Facebook page. But basically, so now we're a team of 3. And Kirk is taking over.
And 3 employees we're talking about, not just. They're actual employees, right?
Right. So there's other people that are contractors or volunteers for Thunderworks to help out and are important members of the team. But in terms of like, hey, I'm getting 40 hours or 30 hours out of somebody that's really contributing, that are employees. That's just me, my wife, and Kirk. So Kirk is took over a lot of the administrative stuff, a lot of the stuff that I was doing really poorly, that he's trying to clean up in terms of managing numbers and doing better budgeting and figuring out the profitability of things and allocating, which is part of budgeting, of like allocating money to figuring out how much we're going to pay for art for this project. And he's also a logistics genius, so he was doing that task for me previously as a contractor, and now he's doing that as an employee. So I am kindly in the process of like shedding off all these responsibilities of things that I don't like to do or things that I'm horrible at, so that I can get back to focusing on products, making, developing and designing titles for the future, which is what I love to do anyway. So and there's a lot of happiness that comes out of that as well. I think there's this not burden, but like there's all these things about publishing games, as you know, that like aren't really about making fun, and that aren't always the funnest thing to do either. So there's this managing a company, running a company is a lot different than like making cool games. It's part of it for sure, but that's been trying to find that initial joy and like amplifying that by getting rid of these things that I don't like as much and putting them in hands of people who are much more capable than I am.
Well, I think, in your the opening overview, I think you've hit on a number of really interesting topics. So I'm going to pull it apart a little bit so we can talk about it. So again, to paint the picture, historically speaking, Thunderworks Games, like lots of folks, bootstrap, Kickstarter, indie publisher, moving along, ends up, you had Bullfrogs and Blend Off and a number of games, but then you have Role Player, And
Right.
role player really cements as an A title. I mean, it sells out. The first campaign was normal, but then it sold out, and then the second campaign, like the reprint campaign, was big, and since then it has been an evergreen title where you're printing it again and again, and has spawned off, not even counting cartographers for a moment, but just spawned off expansions and things like that, monsters and minions, friends and familiars, and so that was like a big moment. So like that was like a separating moment for you where the business had enough growth potential where you could start being like, hey, maybe I should quit my job and become full-time this
Right.
with help from a number of people, because there's other characters that come through. You have the employees, but there are folks like Tim or Scott who are like consistent, people who are part of the like inner mothership of Thunderworks Games, not just
It's
working on one game, right?
right. Right.
And so you move along, and then, and correct me on these inflection points, but so then as you're exploring, you end up doing cartographers, and that's what you do direct to retail. But in terms of pure unit sales, right? Cartographers is your best selling product, right? In terms
For
of
sure. Yeah.
volume.
Yeah.
Um,
There was a moment where I realized that like cartographers had sold more copies than role player, and I was like, okay, we're in a different place now, and it's like
right.
the idea of getting a second evergreen title is like that opens up a lot of opportunities for the company in terms of like, okay, we're gonna have a certain amount of stability because I know that these things are gonna sell for a certain amount of time.
Right. And so these are these moments that are starting to separate you from the pack, or the pack I'm in, if you will, into the next. There's a whole bunch of packs in a row, and they're like, one day it'll be the Asmodee pack. You'll get there. But so 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 then there's this interesting thing, right? Because you have your medium weight stuff, cartographer's lightweight, so to speak, and it's growing. But you have the opus we were talking about in our last call, which is Role Player Adventures, which is a 20+ pound behemoth of a game, has
Yes.
since released, cost you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to fulfill it, to ship it.
Right.
Um, Really critically acclaimed. I mean, I don't know, it's 8 point something on BGG, but like, it's game of the year for a lot of folks. I mean, this is but this is not, I mean, this is like 10 times the game that Role Player is in terms of stuff.
Right.
Um, so, and so you have these different moments. How have you, so, okay, so what am I getting at? So you've had these product moments, and these product moments are producing this growth. From this growth, you've now started to take on more risk, whether they're bigger prints. You took on Cape May was a risk when you're like, well, hey, let's do another straight to retail. You're doing 10 Penny Park.
Yep.
When you think of, do you find yourself starting to build a structure and a plan out of this, or is it more still just like, no, it's basically I just make what I want, and then we build it from there? Like how has it started? Has the product side started to become more structured and more planned, or is it more like, no, I just keep swinging the bat, and the bat, if the ball goes out the park, I run around the bases, Ed? Like, how is that on the product side? How is it, or like, you want to free up time to do more of your own stuff, but obviously cartographers wasn't, not obvious, but you didn't design cartographers,
Right.
Stan, right?
No,
Um,
that was Jordy Adon was the
George,
designer.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like, how do you think of that product sphere for Thunderworks Games?
Yeah. So, after doing Role Player Adventures, which is like, in terms of product size, it's massive. And there was basically the timing was right for it for me in terms of like, I'd grown enough that like I could invest the kind of money that it took to get Role Player Adventures off the ground. I could invest the kind of time. The pandemic helped to some degree where me and James and I were having like daily calls reviewing content and trying to figure out where to go, and then at some point it goes on to me to finish. But there's just lifting that behemoth of a project and pushing it out the door and pouring that much passion into it. Like it was like by the time that's over, there's a certain level of exhaustion, I think. And so I was like, well, the next couple projects, like let's do some smaller things that like I can get done in a certain amount of time, something that doesn't take me 3 years to get to a place where we can get to Kickstarter. So I don't necessarily have like this product plan of like these are the kind of games that I want to publish, in 2024 and 2025. It's still like I find games that I like, and I design games that I like, obviously. And then there's a certain amount of like intuition and gut feeling where it comes to like, does this product make sense to do? And I just kind of, I wouldn't say I'm the best planner in the world in terms of how I want things to look in 5 years. I feel like I'm pretty good at identifying, things that have a potential to succeed and just chasing them down and making them as good as they can be.
Right. I mean, and that's not a bad answer. And actually, I sort of knew a lot of that answer myself
Right,
from watching the
right.
show. He just gets up to bat, just points out in the direction, and then he swings, right? But the okay, so let's talk about the team, because I think this is also interesting, because these are the like one of the things that is happening, for better for worse, hopefully for better, right?
Right.
Is it's growing financial investment, more encumbrance, not in a bad way, but now you've got three people who are employed and these contractors. As we
Right.
look at, and for folks who watch this channel, I mean, a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of effort that goes into a specific title, and this is we're not really deep diving like, hey, cartographers, designers, art, graphic design. Like each one is a little product pod, and if you're going to be running as many games as you're doing, you're going to be doing it with different pods, right? Hey, this pod's focused on this pod's focused on this.
Right.
And they're not employees, they all have their own deals, but like, in order to do a wide range of products, you can't just have, the same one person do all of it, right? But you start building out that core Thunderworks team. And I was wondering, like, when you think about as a publisher, like what are the core pieces of your business that touches business and folks supporting you that touches all of your products, like how would you describe those roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, so like definitely adding the third person and even adding Claire. There's this, there's so much of running this business that, I'm not the best documenter in the world. So much of it just like lives in my head. So then there's been this effort to get more organized so that like the information is available to people when they need it. They're not like, oh, well, Keith knows where that file is in some crazy sub folder. No big deal, So since we've been bringing on all these people, like I've started to need to be a little bit more organized, and also give people the freedom to organize things on my behalf. So there definitely
Then
is.
you're not gonna know where the file is when you
I
need
know.
it, man.
I do that. Be like, hey, where's that file? It was here before. Did somebody move it? No. So there's, we use tools to communicate better, and we have regular calls and stuff, and we definitely have. I'm focused on right now as the kind of the creative director of the company. So I'm doing all the art direction. I'm doing, evaluating products. I'm doing development, and I'm currently interacting directly with manufacturing, and so we kind of cut up all these roles. It was interesting when we brought Kirk on. We made this big Trello board, and actually Kirk made this big Trello board, and he like cut up everything that that needs to be done, all the things that Thunderworks does, and then we start going through this discussion about like, okay, who's in charge of this, and who's the key person, and who are the other people, and how do our different contractors fit in to kind of establish like where the swimming lanes are. And I hate the word swimming lanes, but it's important so that like people know who to talk to, which member of the team about a certain thing, and so that when people default to me because I've always been the person, and I can just like push that stuff off. So that's kind of part of that concept of like trying to do more delegation and shedding of responsibilities, giving people something that they can own and like really invest themselves in, and really, feel like they're not being micromanaged, because I don't like being micromanaged. I want to be able to trust my people and let them own things. but it's definitely been a transition. So there's this, as Thunderworks grows, the company's changing. And that's like not something that I was mentally prepared for. Like I was like,
Cool.
if everything's working, why should anything change? But clearly things started breaking down in terms of like just me personally feeling overloaded all the time, and like some of the fun and the joy and just the mental health of being a board game publisher was getting kind of heavy. And I was really stubborn about like bringing on people and like taking on more risk.
Right. Well, I definitely think talking a little bit about some of the fortitude, constitution, mental challenges, things that you need to get through that period, right? Because I think a number of folks roll into that period and have to figure it out. And I do think that there isn't a good forum really for sort of discussing and dealing, especially when it comes to sort of the emotional toll and the family toll and figuring that out. So I do want to talk about that, but to stay on those roles and responsibilities for a second, if you'd humor me, you talked about the need of delegation in this, but like, can we just take a second, and I'll start because I'm sort of going after a particular thing, and actually break out and talk about those swim lanes, because I think as you've hit whatever tier of publisher you are, and you're delegating and splitting it up, that Trello board, like those specific swim lanes. And just for the benefit of folks, when somebody says swim lanes, the idea here is, here are roles and responsibilities that person A is responsible for, and that's their lane. And if you're person B, you don't go swim in their lane, you stick in your lane. And the reaction that Keith had about not liking it is a sense of barrier and restriction that's saying. You have to say, no, Joe, you don't do that. That's Suze's job. And but you do want to have, as a company grows, a sense of ownership as well as a sense of clarity of ownership. But specifically those roles. So you mentioned a few. Broadly speaking, there's the creative director, overseeing of the product quality and experiences that Thunderworks Games is trying to deliver, and you like hitting the ball out of the park, so you're a good person for that. And then as part of that, you mentioned like sourcing of there's the design development that, okay, so there's the creative that you do on your own products, but you're the designer, but then also the job of sourcing and finding new products, playing them, evaluating them as a publisher, because you're not just doing your games, right?
Right.
So you mentioned that. Dialing into the games, you mentioned development, and there's probably the design and all that piece.
Sure.
But then there was the offshoot that you started. So I'm going to start with the ones you listed, and then we'll get the rest. You mentioned you briefly sort of hit Kickstarter and manufacturing. And so the whole manufacturing process, communicating with the factory, doing the reviews. You then use the word logistics, or earlier you use the word logistics, and we can talk about logistics as being how the product moves from factory to different distribution centers or different partners, and then potentially also just shipping, if you want to call it that. But that, when somebody says logistics, that's typically what they're talking about. Okay, so what other categories of roles, responsibilities comes up on the Thunderworks side? I mean, that was a good portion.
I mean, some other ones that are like, marketing is a big piece of it. So some of that is like retailer relationships, and some of it is sales. And that's relating to not only just to customers but also to retailers, and like managing distribution relationships. There's other. I was trying to pull up the
Trello
and failing, but there's things like who's in charge of so some of the examples are like retailer relationships. Like one of the other benefits of knowing swim lanes is that like there isn't like a duplication of work, because sometimes a request will come in or somebody will start talking to somebody from Thunderworks about a certain thing, and if it isn't clear whose responsibility that is, then two people could independently start trying to solve that problem and then come back like one after the other, and then the person who they feel like, well, why was I doing that? Kirk already did that. So it's like,
Right.
there's some of that that's important as well, so that we kind of make sure we're not duplicating efforts.
Well, so in marketing, there's sort of marketing to retailers. There's marketing broadly as your company. There's there's social media sort of fits
For
into
sure.
marketing depending on how you're looking at it. In newsletters, that kind of thing. Um, I don't think you said community, right? But there's community management, which sort of can
Sure.
touch into social media, and customer service, which and so talking about that roles and responsibilities very quickly when you're running a publisher, you can see how some of these things, is the customer newsletter the same person as the Kickstarter newsletter, as the retailer newsletter? Is the slice it's a newsletter, or
Right.
is the slice it's a retailer, it's customer, whatever, and they manage that? Or, this customer service, they came in through the community page about their problem.
Is it a
Is that a
community
community?
management's problems, or is it a customer
Right,
service management person's problems, right?
right.
So yeah, it gets sometimes we get really fine, like who's building prototypes for playtesting versus like who's answering customer service emails through our ticketing system, and then what happens when a ticket comes in from a retailer? Does that go to the person doing customer service, or is that the retail person? So there's kind of all these discussions to like make sure like the wheels are turning correctly, to make sure like this machine is operating relatively efficiently. So yeah, it's important.
And I think that's a really important growth and inflection point, as I watch it from afar. But like, so for me, I'm obviously, or not obvious, but I still have a full-time job that's not Pencil First Games. Um, but I have Jessica, who's been, doing a considerable amount of regular work with us. And what's been interesting, and there's different approaches you could take where you have those lanes. I haven't gotten to that point where, like, Kim Robinson does a lot of our graphic design or different product things, but I
Right.
don't really have enough scale yet to say, no, I want to actually have the lanes that you like, the step you're in. I'm like in the step prior. So in the
Right.
step prior, I'm in the one where it's like, what's the difference between Jessica and I? Jessica's really good at attention to detail.
Right.
And as a part of that, being organized, on top of things, consistent, and has the time and like laser focus to do those things. So in some ways, we're in that shared loop where it's sort of like, no, we're just involved in everything together, sort of.
Right.
But then as it's falling into different work buckets, it either falls to me or it falls to her, in terms of how it gets managed. So like an example would be like, hey, managing the art direction on XYZ, I'm still doing that and being detailed about it, versus, oh, hey, how are we managing, our retailer relationships? And so we have in that smaller tier, like we just talk all the time, and then it's really like you or me or you or me or you or me. And then there's buckets of work, which is just always her, or buckets of work that's always me. But it's pretty fluid, and we don't really have swim lanes. It's
Right.
more like just expertise lanes. But there's a lot of glue and time cost to like, and like reading of like CC'd on emails and being like there's a lot of extra stuff that has to go to like operate that way. That like with two people is sort of plausible. But as you're in your position now, you've stepped out of that, right? Which is like, well, no, now there's all these other people sort of moving across it, and how, you've now phased into like, no, the swim lanes, right? So I think for folks it's an important thing to be thinking about as you're a growing publisher. How do you want to manage and be handling this? And I think for you, from what I've come to appreciate, a big part of all of the swim lanes is not in any way wanting to be swimming in those lanes, right?
Right.
Like a part of it is like not want, no, I don't want any of these lanes. I need other people to do these lanes,
Right.
because the thing I want to do, which is presumably make fantastic games, um, I don't
I
have
mean,
time for.
a part of that discussion of like going through all the things that Thunderworks does and attaching names and like priority contacts to is, hey, what do you like doing? Not just to me, but to everybody. It's like, okay, Kirk, what do you like doing? of all these things, which one of these do you want to grab? It's kind of like you just spill out. It reminds me of, that's a dumb story, but you just you just spill out all the tasks, and people just start grabbing stuff that they want to do, and then kind of see what's left over and start like seeing.
You don't have enough in your hand. You're gonna take this 3.
Right,
You're gonna
right.
take this
Or
card.
this is already super related to something you're already doing, so you should take this. And obviously, new things will get added to that list, or by realizing that there's something we're not doing that we should be doing, or something that doesn't make sense to be doing, we can take off that list anytime. But it was definitely kind of an important moment, and so now I'm learning how to. To basically to coordinate the other people to talk to each other, so that I don't have to be involved, and then also, but also learning how to like be in contact with them enough so that they feel like they're guided and they have everything they need to do their job, but trying to carve out my time to do the things that I want to do and I need to do. So it is interesting. It seems obvious in hindsight, which most things do, but kind of as I was adding more people, like this wasn't part of my process. I wasn't thinking about this stuff until like the first week. Everybody's jamming and trying to do the same things, and it's like, whoa, this isn't working. We got to figure this out. And that's been interesting. And another kind of thing that leads into this is how fast should your company, when should you bring on that first employee, that second employee? I see publishers that I feel, maybe I don't have all the numbers, that I feel like are smaller than me. They're like, oh yeah, we have eight people on the team. And I was like,
yeah, it's like, I see those things.
How can you afford that? Like I resisted bringing on people as long as I could, because the risk made me nervous. Like, I don't know, what if everything, people stop buying Role Player and the next 3 games are garbage and don't sell, and we have no money, and then I have to let these people go and all this stuff. So it's like I'm trying to minimize the risk, but in doing that, I created a lot of work for myself, right. So much that it was like too much for sure. And so like growing, I think those first couple employees are really critical. But now that I have like 2 employees, like getting a third employee doesn't seem like that big a deal. Like it's like I start to get addicted to like giving other people my work. Well, I have this thing on my plate, but I don't really want it that much. I could hire another person and give it to them. So that's
right. And for what it's worth, just because it popped in my head, that cooperative game where you chuck a bunch of cards on the table, some of which are good, great, and crappy, and everyone just fucking grabs as fast as they can, but you have to pick up every card. So like, there's that first bit, and then there's the last bit where everyone's like arguing over the who's going to pick up the bomb, who can withstand the bomb shot. There's a game in there. So yeah, I think I mean, and that's a process you've gone through, and it having watched your show from afar, as conservative as you are, I still think you've been I still think you have taken risks that would have been detrimental had you not had another success. I think some of those choices you made were all the right choices, but were buoyed. What's the word? I'm like held up by the fact that you then it included buoyed by the next golden step that you put down. So it's definitely a risky, including leaving your job, right? Like those are all similar choices. I think we've been talking now for about 30 minutes. We briefly talked on the product. We've talked on these lanes. I want to end with that last thing you were sort of rolling into, which I pulled you back from, which was sort of the emotional side of it. I mean, I think maybe you can talk through, to whatever extent you're comfortable, the struggles and challenges that you found as with the success and all these things that are going on, where like the work started sucking the energy towards creative. Like, can you just talk through a couple of those periods of difficulty and what helped you get through them or manage them?
Well, sure. I mean, I think maybe one of the tenets of Thunderworks, or just the way that I want to run my business, is that I want to treat people and give people a level of service and provide products to the quality level that that I would expect myself. So like, I part of the problem is just being on all the time, right? So like, anybody can contact me on almost, all the social media platforms, and I'm going to respond. And usually, like, it doesn't matter what day it is. Oftentimes I'm responding to customers at 3 in the morning on a Saturday night or whatever. Like, there's, no real, boundary around that. And I would be working oftentimes on weekends, and there's a problem, and my instinct is like, solve it and solve it as fast as you can, because if I had a problem, I would appreciate it if that happened for me. So, starting to learn how to back away from that a little bit. I mean, I'm definitely on a lot, but trying to make conscious efforts of like, hey, I'm not going to, go into the warehouse on a Saturday and ship some random dude his package so he can get it a day earlier or something like that. Like, pulling away from that kind of stuff, and just kind of thinking about like, hey, these are my little hobbies that I like to do, whether it be like, getting caught up on Netflix shows or whatever, and like saying, okay, it's time for me to do something for myself. And honestly, my wife has been a big part of that as well. Of like, she's seeing me struggling, and she's like, hey, put your phone away. you don't need to answer that email right now. We're doing something as a family. So that has been helpful. And just honestly bringing on people to handle things that I don't have to. So like, has been a big piece of it, but it's still like an ongoing struggle, I think. And especially with the pandemic, like, life is harder. There's less interactions with people. It's harder to do play testing. It's harder to, kind of connect to the humanity of being a community of people on this planet. Obviously the technology helps, but it's still difficult.
And it's sort of, we've talked about it, but you use the word tenant, but like somewhat fundamental to tabletop gaming, right? Like, certainly you can do tabletop gaming online in a variety of formats, but
Right.
For those who have dedicated their lives or been very active in producing these things, a lot of it came from like enjoying being with people and playing games in person, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so,
like, not being able to do that kind of distance you from the reason why you started doing this in the first place. So then you're like, why am I working so hard on all these games that like I don't even get to play games, and like that's why I love this stuff, So luckily I've been playing games a lot more often, and the joy of playing games just like is a real big motivator because you come up with ideas, or you see stuff that other people are doing, and it's inspiring because you're like, oh man, look at the way they did this. We could do something similar to that in our game, or do something even better in our game. And because there was so much not in-person game playing going on, it was kind of fading a little bit. But I'm happy to say that I'm definitely playing games again regularly with a group of people who are all taking safety precautions and stuff, and it's been awesome. So I feel like I'm back. That's kind of the key piece to kind of get back to a state of just loving what you're doing.
right. And so, okay. No, I mean, I think that all resonates. I think it is a challenge, but finding the fun, for lack of it. Well, you talk about that in a game sense, but in a life sense, right? Like making sure that balance is there. And as you grow and expand your business, hopefully a lot. I mean, I would say you are less responsive now, seemingly in a positive way, than historically. Like, there's more times where you're like, Ed, it's the weekend, I'm not answering your question. And I'm like, fine, take your weekend off. Don't pick up the phone. That's fine.
Right. Or like, ask me a question that I know you can find the answer to. I'm not going to respond right away. I'm going to wait 4 hours and see if you can find the solution yourself before I answer.
Yeah, that's Keith's specialty. But looking forward, you have an amazing team. You have a new year in front of you. In terms of existing stuff, lockup and the lockup expansion, and Tenpenny Parks are hitting retail soon, right?
Yeah, so those are all on the water, and will be fulfilling the breakout lockup Kickstarter in the next 2-3 weeks, and then 10 penny we're gonna take pre-orders right before probably, I think we were talking about March 8th probably, and then it'll come out by the end of March probably. So assuming
And March 8th is a wonderful day because Molpico also
oh yeah,
be launching. But so that's like Q1. Those
right.
games coming to retail, Molpeak. But then what's next? Go forward. Is there another Kickstarter? Like what's on the horizon product wise?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a bunch of stuff in the works. Probably there's a cyberpunk game coming out called Metro Runner, which will probably be
Cyberpunk. That sounds like a whole new thematic place for Thunderworks
for,
Games.
yeah, yeah. So that will
Metro
be
Runner.
Metro Runner from the designer Stephen Kerr. It's his first published design, so that's exciting to see. I've honestly been working on this game with him probably for 4 years, and we're finally getting around to it. So that title,
Exciting.
I'm looking. These are the tentative plans as things change. So Metro Runner will probably go to Kickstarter in July, and then a new game in the role player universe from another first-time designer named Jason Lentz called Dawn of Ulos, which is the dawn of the role-player universe, and that
What? What?
so that we're looking at September for that, and then the second expansion for Role Player Adventures called. Well, I don't know if we've announced the name of it. I'm not going to.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, that'll come. I'm thinking in November. We'll see. There's a lot. Those are the kind of the big Kickstarter products. I've got some other smaller things coming, but I guess the other big thing, we have new map packs coming out for cartographers and cartographers heroes. The first one, Pack 4, the Frozen Expanse, is in June. The fifth one, which is called the
Map Pack City.
it's the mountains one. That's called.
The
Man, I
mountain.
can't remember what it's called. That one's coming out in July, and then the third one, which is Hornhelm Market, that one will come out in August. So you'll be able to get, if you're doing conventions this year, we plan on having Map Pack 4 at Origins and Map Pack 6 at Gen Con, and in between we'll be doing the middle one too. So yeah,
Very
so that's
cool,
the
man.
product line. The goal right now is still to do like 3 to 4 projects a year, and the map packs plus 10 penny plus the lockup expansion is kind of that's the docket for 2022.
Awesome. Very exciting. And actually, when you were saying all that, a category we didn't even talk about, swim lane category, is localization and international. Is like a whole another zone because a lot of
Yeah,
those titles are coming out in other countries
right.
at different cadences. But we don't have to drop back into that. It just occurred to me. But it sounds
Yeah,
like an awesome slate, man. That is a lot of fun coming.
yeah. I mean, my mind is always so much further forward, right? So sometimes I forget like what's happening right now. I'm thinking about what are we doing in 2023. How's 2024 going to look like? And that's the job of the owner, the CEO, the big picture guy is like to be thinking forward, and that's something that I did not start out being very good at, and something I'm trying to get better at for sure.
Awesome. Well, listen, this was a long chat, but an absolute pleasure. We will be back in somewhere between 1 and 3 years to have another discussion, and we will see how it progressed. Hopefully, all for the best. And awesome, man. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thank you, buddy.
Okay, later. Bye.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.